A mistake in 1987 birthed an interesting model. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. More on that story here in a minute, but today we are going to document a very unusual late 80s Gibson SG model that most people have never heard of, and it's mainly because it's just really bizarre. It's a mixture between an SG Custom and an SG Standard. So what would that look like? I suppose we'll just have to open this up to find out. It would look like this. It's got 2 pickups, it's got a TP6 tailpiece, and it's got the custom fretboard, but oh my goodness, there's something strange on our headstock. My friends, this is what is known as the SG Elite. It was essentially between the 62 reissue SG and the Les Paul Custom at that point in time, where, again, it blent the specs of a custom and a standard. However, it was basically just its own very unique model here that utilized very new technology using their Spotlight humbuckers, if you had a first-year example, because these things existed from 1987 through about 1989. So besides its interesting fretboard, the biggest claim to fame for this series is right down here. We have 2 volumes, a master tone, and a coil split switch. So you could actually get split coil tones out of this. This series was released right alongside the new Les Paul Custom Lite, which they look like these. Those were a thinned down Les Paul. Now, were these SGs thinner than normal or thicker than normal? No, not really. They're kind of boring in that aspect. The custom lights are definitely a bit more iconic, and that's probably why most people don't even realize that these things exist. But these were available in 2 different colors. You can find Pearl White, which is a very slightly metallic white finish, and then you can find the new metallic sunset finish, which is basically a pink. So, which one is this? Honestly, I don't think it's either of those. I think this is just a pure white version because I have pearl white guitars in my collection and this is not pearl white. This is just straight up white. So there's always custom colors out there, even if they're really not all that different. I just recently purchased this pearl white Les Paul Custom for my personal collection. I'm sorry I haven't cleaned it up yet, but do you see how it has that metallic shine to it? And granted, this one has aged yellow over in the lacquer over the years. However, it's a very different finish. This one is definitely not pearl white, so that's actually kind of cool. I'm glad I grabbed this one to document. And that transitions us perfectly into our next tale of a factory error that birthed a different model. In February of 1987, someone done goofed up at the factory on this new model. Whether it was a simple typo like in 1968 that you can learn about in this episode, or somebody just thought they were making Les Paul Customs. 32 of these new SG Elites were accidentally routed for 3 pickups. So naturally they're like, what do we do here? So they just spec'd them out like a custom, except for it has the SG Elite headstock, no binding on it, and the crown. The customs did not get the coil splitter switch, likely due to the same reasoning why it got routed for 3 pickups. And for some reason they decided, let's not throw a pick guard on these. So there were 26 of those in sunset metallic finish. 2 of them were factory firsts, the rest of the 24 were labeled as seconds, and then there were 6 pearl whites that were factory firsts. So naturally you would think one of those is going to be really expensive, right? Generally, when they show up to the market, they're not worth that much more because collectors don't really pine after the SG Elite. It's an interesting model, but unless you just collect weird Gibson guitars like I do, you don't really need one of these in your collection necessarily, but they're definitely interesting to learn about. Funny story, I've actually already reviewed this guitar before, but as my old format, I wanted to re-update it because I was initially planning on keeping this one for my personal collection. But the guy I bought it from only bought this because he saw that video, so he thought that was cool that it came full circle that it ended up going to me at the end. So to learn more about this SG Elite, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench to take a look at its parts and specs. Alright, inside the Elite, we found some interesting things here. So it appears that the plastics are reacting to the finish and making it yellow. So no, this is not like this is what the guitar started color-wise and then it's faded into this white color. That's like the exact same thing as a stand rash, which you do occasionally see. I mean, Gibson's white finishes are really weird, but I think that's the most extreme case of that I've seen. But it appears to have evenly happened with all the black plastics here, including our pickup rings. Although maybe not quite as much for the rings. But here we go. These are what are known as the Spotlight humbuckers. I did not know that until just researching this episode, I just happened to find an old Gibson ad that referred to them as Spotlight humbuckers. So that is the official term for the pickups that came stock in the SG Elite as well as the custom lights, at least in the first year of production, because later on they transitioned into the Bill Lawrence HBL HBR set. A really easy way to tell if you have those is most of them have a really large screw for your height adjustment. And then the backside of them look like this. They're a circuit board. But the reason why they had to use special pickups in here is all because of the coil splitting down here. So these are 4-conductor wiring. That's why we don't have the normal braided stuff. It's the gray shielded. So these are actually a little bit hotter than a PAF style. So full on, the bridge is 9.9 k ohms. Our neck position, a little bit hotter at 10.04, essentially the same, but the middle, just for fun, almost 5. So that means the up position is regular. Flipped it down, and then we cut everything down. So now it's 5.12 in the bridge, 5.08 in the neck, and the middle 2.58. And now you might be wondering, okay, so how do I know that this is not a Tim Shaw PAF? The first giveaway, obviously the whole 4-conductor wiring, but the second is the type of screws right here. If you ever see a chrome screw that's pretty large like this, with this patent number on it, you know it's not a Tim Shaw because those only had small brass screws in those locations. It's very common for late 80s pickups to mistakenly be sold as Tim Shaws, so you always got to be careful if you're buying them used. But here you can see our neck tenon in here. Everything's looking the way I would want to see. I'm not seeing like any pearl white finish under here like somebody has refinished the whole guitar, but we can see our mahogany body in here. With the vintage buffing compound, that's how you know it left the Gibson factory like that. But now, interestingly enough, this does have a historically mounted ABR1 bridge, so there's no stud in the body for that. So that's why this is not like a regular SG standard of the era. It's more so the 62 reissue versus the custom. Now I've got to be really careful showing you this. This is the ABR1 bridge, but it appears it started life as a wired one, but it somewhere along the lines lost its wire, so all these saddles will fall out if I don't hold them in place like this. But there you can see our branding. Pretty much all 70s and 80s ones look very similar on the back, even some late 60s ones, with minute differences. But perhaps most importantly is the TP6 tailpiece. So this is a Rendell Wall creation in the late 70s. Usually you only see it on really high-end limited edition guitars. Have they ever really seen mainstream use outside of like the BB King Lucille? Not really. I mean, they still make these things today. Most people just find them to be a little bit redundant, or they use them because they think they look cool. Because generally, you don't need a fine tuner on a guitar that doesn't have like a locking nut system. So here's my theory for the SG Elite. They wanted to find a way to make the TP6 relevant. Because prior to that, the best marketing that they had was you're supposed to be able to make micro adjustments mid-playing. Like if you're playing a really cool jazzy chord and you're like, nah, the G string's a little bit off. I need to make a quick tweak as I'm playing, you know, as it's ringing out. That's what that whole thing was for, because your hand was tied up playing the chord. And if you think I'm talking crazy, trust me, I've got the box that tells you that exactly. Right hand fine-tuning while you're playing. So I think that's why they gave this model this redundant locking nut system up here. So you actually could lock it down. So none of that has any part of your tuning stability. It is just strictly your strings on a stop bar setup instead of being like a Floyd Rose. So in theory, this guitar should stay in tune really well. And if you need to make minor adjustments, you can use your TP6 tailpiece just like you do with a Floyd Rose. So it's not all that uncommon for people to rip the locking nuts off of these because they think they're a little bit redundant and not necessarily needed. But I think I'm going to try to set this one up as originally intended. But hey, would you look at that? You've got a little bit of discoloration here, even from the TP6 tailpiece. I'm not sure what that's about. All right, let's just take a second to appreciate the curves of the body, because SGs are finely sculpted beings. You really just gotta see them in the light to fully appreciate them. Now, obviously, not as carved up as like a 60s SG, but it's not too bad here. After cleaning this up, I found there's a ding there, another small ding right there, and a little bit of a light impression right here. I'd say that's not too bad because this thing was actually played quite a bit. You'll see that on the frets. But you've got a regular 3-way toggle switch, nothing fancy there. But it's volume, and a master tone, and once again, normal and coil split with your output jack on the front. And that is important to note because regular 80s SG standards are just a little bit thicker, and they have the output jack on the side in case you've always hated SGs for their top-mounted ones. So now let's move on from the reissue style body to our custom neck. Obviously, these frets polished up nicely, and this was a well-seasoned fretboard, I guess you could say. It had a lot of natural oils in it, so now that I've cleaned it up, it looks a little bit nicer. But we've definitely got some fret wear in these areas, so a level recrown would benefit this guitar, but I doubt it's going to affect the playability of it right now. I am seeing a little bit of fingernail divoting wear right here, pretty minor, but as of right now, I think I'm just going to hold this one back because A, it's a color that it's not supposed to be, and B, I mean, it's a pretty nice example of an SG Elite. Even the gold is in pretty good condition on this one. It's just got some light string wear. But we've got 22 styled frets of the era. I mean, they're not quite the low wide that you see on most. They have a little bit more meat to them. But that is indeed a true ebony fretboard with the real mother of pearl. It's all looking pretty nice. Got a nut width of 1.69 inches. That increases to 2.06 by the 12th. Got a first fret neck depth of 0.84. And wow, that is skinny, 0.87? Wow. Yeah, SGs are known for having thin necks. Here's that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. You can see it stays very consistent, just gets a little bit wider. And yep, this one does not feel like an exception. But we can see our large black side marker inlays here. Now you've got finish checking, where the fretboard meets the neck. I mean, that's pretty common on white guitars. We'll see that where the neck joins the body here in a minute as well. But let's take a gander at our headstock here. We can see some absolutely gorgeous mahogany in our truss rod cavity right here. Kind of hard to see the truss rod itself, but it looks like it's in perfect condition. And then this has always been one of my favorite locking nut systems. It's very stylistically pleasing to me because you have these little caps over top of it. So normally you basically just have something that looks like this, and then you have something that goes in there that you then tighten down to lock the strings. But Gibson's idea to make it better is they actually made it a wedge shape, that way you know which way they're supposed to go in. But then once you have that all situated, you can put this cap right over top of it and it just secures it in place, so it makes sure it doesn't loosen, and I think it just kind of looks cool. It also makes it stick up quite a lot more than normal. But if you want to remove one of these, there's a screw right here, right there, and then I think you have to go over here, loosen this out to take these off to get to the other two screws. So if you don't want the locking nut system on an SG Elite, you're gonna have 4 screw holes on the face that you could fill in. However, if you actually want to rip that off and replace it, just remember your original truss rod cover looks like this. It's sawn off at the factory, so you'd have to also replace that. And probably have to drill a new screw hole would be my guess for the bottom ring. But here we go. Regular Gibson SG standard style headstock. It's an acquired taste. Like that's good on a classic SG, but when you've got the custom fretboard, it would have been cool had they would completely blinged it out or at least gave it some binding, but these are quirky and unique for what they are, and I appreciate that. Now they've got it all strung back up, I guess I understand why people rip those things off. It doesn't seem to actually lock the strings, because if you tighten it all the way down, these flaps no longer close and stay in place, so you have to like almost lock it all the way down, and then they do, I don't know, maybe there's like some micro adjustments I need to make that I'm not 100% aware of, but I was unsuccessful in getting that to fully lock down. Alright, the back opens up a little bit of mystery for us. So right here, you can see our control cavity route. However, our control cavity plate does not fit very good. Now you could just say, hey, it's Gibson, they didn't make that good of a plate. However, this does not look like a Gibson made product to me because it's very rough around the edges, so this has likely been replaced at some point in time. So now you have to question, why was that lost ever? I mean, we can still see how the finish has discolored in certain areas where it was in contact with the plastic. Pots are still the original ones. They date to 1988. However, if you look here, you can tell that's not original solder joints, and that's for a pickup. I can see some non-originality here, so it appears somebody has taken the pickups out of this guitar at some point in time and then replaced them back with the stock ones. Which makes sense, because even though this portrays pretty good on video, I mean, there's still nicks and dings. I mean, there's one here that I showed you earlier. There is an impression mark right here. You can see a little bit of clear coat wear in this area. If I played a guitar for 30 years, it would probably look something similar to this. That's why I'm okay with the condition. So we've got a couple non-original solder joints. Not a big deal. We also have non-original Schaller strap locks on this one. Then if you're buying an 80s SG and it's white, it's very common to see this crack line around the heel joint.
into the neck. But usually my rule of thumb is, as long as it's a small little sliver crack like this and you don't have like a decent gap to it, it's probably never been repaired, and that's just the paint being thin in that area. The other thing you should look for is if it goes all the way to the neck, like showing that it might have came off at one point. This one, it doesn't extend into this area, but it goes like right up to that. So I'm pretty confident this one has never had any repair, but unfortunately, that's something you have to live with. Back of the neck has a little bit of clear coat wear right here. We'll be able to see the rest of that on the blacklight segment that is coming up here. We've got our Golden Grover tuners here. The top two have a little bit of wear, and our serial number dates it to 1988. As far as under blacklight, everything's looking the way I would expect to see. Everything on the body's good. Plastic stopped glowing after about 1985 due to they change how they made them. Headstock has an even amount of glow. In the back you can see those areas I was already telling you about, with the clear coat wear here on the neck and on the side, so no breaks, cracks, and repairs as far as I'm concerned. The neck's looking good too. So yeah, just kind of a weird fluke on the color, I guess. Not that hard to mess up pearl white with regular white, I suppose. All said and done, this one's a little over 7.5 pounds. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds.
All right, so first things first, is it neck divey? Yes, very much so. I've got an extra gripping strap on to help with that. So far, I think my favorite tone out of this one is regular humbucker mode, middle position. Very chimey without being too chimey. Bridge has got a good bite to it. Good Stratty-like tone. I gotta say, I'm having a heck of a time keeping this thing remotely in tune at all, so I think I'm just gonna give up on the whole locking nut system. Now that we know all about the Gibson SG Elite, what are my final thoughts on it? Honestly, one of the worst SGs I have ever had the disprivilege to play. It didn't want to stay in tune. It was neck divey. It didn't really sound that fantastic in my opinion, but I've been feeling rather uninspired lately in my playing, so maybe some of it comes down to that. I thought there were some pretty good tones that came out of these pickups, but they're definitely not your usual Tim Shaw PAFs, that's for sure. You've got so many different tonal opportunities. So would I suggest trying one of these SG Elites? I mean, if you like what you saw in this episode, yeah, but for me personally, this one was not that good. But if you're a big SG fan, I mean, your opinions might differ. But it is cool. I'm glad I redocumented it. It's got so many interesting specs, and I hope you enjoyed learning the tale. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. Hey, if you enjoyed this weird 80s SG, you might enjoy this one. It's called the SG 90 Double. They also reissued it, kind of, in the late 90s, calling it this time the SG Z. You can check them out here.